I bought the same $5 lottery ticket every week hoping to win. My husband laughed at me for 10 years. But that Wednesday, I checked the numbers. I had won $73 million. But when I called, the manager said, $33 million. Good day, dear listeners. It's Diana again. I'm glad you're here with me. Please subscribe to my channel and like this video. And also, let me know in the comments which city you're listening from. That way I can see how far my story has traveled. People always ask me when I knew. When did I understand, really understand, that my marriage was a slow and quiet disaster? The honest answer is that I knew for years. I just chose not to see it. That is what you do when you have built your entire life around one person. You stop looking directly at the truth because the truth would mean that everything you sacrificed meant nothing. My name is Carol Maddox. For 22 years, I was Richard Maddox's wife. I cooked his meals and ironed his shirts and raised his 2 sons and attended his company dinners in dresses he approved of beforehand. I gave up my accounting degree, my job at Hendricks and Lane, my apartment in Columbus, my sense of self, piece by piece, the way you don't notice a tide going out until the shore is bare. We lived in a 4-bedroom house in Westerville, Ohio, with a wraparound porch and a 2-car garage and a mailbox that said, "The Maddoxes" in brass letters. And from the outside, it must have looked like everything a life is supposed to be. But a house is not a home when the man inside it treats you like furniture. Richard was not cruel in the dramatic, obvious ways that make for easy stories. He never raised his hand. He never screamed. He was something more corrosive. He was dismissive. He had a talent for making everything I did feel slightly ridiculous, slightly beneath serious consideration. When I suggested a family trip to Vermont, he smiled the way you smile at a child who has said something charming but impractical. When I enrolled in a ceramics class at the community center, he told his brother at Thanksgiving, loud enough for me to hear from the kitchen, that Carol had taken up hobbies. The word hobbies landed like a small slap every time I thought about it afterward. The lottery ticket was the worst of it. Or rather, it was the thing he laughed at most consistently. It started 11 years ago, almost by accident. I had stopped at the Quick Mart on Morse Road to buy milk, and the woman in front of me in line was scratching a ticket on the counter, laughing at something with the cashier. Something about the image struck me. Not the gambling, but the hope in it. The simple, stubborn human act of believing that something good might happen on an ordinary Tuesday. I bought one ticket, a $5 Powerball. I didn't win anything. I bought another one the following Wednesday. I didn't win that either. But I kept going back. Every Wednesday morning, after I dropped Richard's dry cleaning at Henderson's, and before I picked up groceries at Kroger, I stopped at the Quick Mart and bought one ticket. The same numbers every time, 7, 14, 22, 31, 44, and Powerball 9. My birthday, my mother's birthday, the year I graduated high school, the year we got married, the year our younger son Danny was born. Numbers that meant something to me. Numbers that belonged to my life. Richard found out about it 6 months in. I had left a receipt in my coat pocket. $5 a week, he said at dinner, not looking up from his phone. Do you know what the odds are, Carol? I know what the odds are. 1 in 292 million. You have a better chance of being struck by lightning twice on the same day. I know. It's not a financial strategy. It's magical thinking. I said nothing. I passed him the bread basket. And the following Wednesday, I bought my ticket. For 10 years, Richard laughed. Sometimes gently the way he laughed at most things about me. Sometimes with an edge, when money was a point of tension. Still throwing away $5 a week, he'd say in front of his sister Patricia, who would smile her thin, careful smile. Patricia was a family law attorney in Dublin, Ohio. She had an office with a view of the Scioto River and an opinion about everything. She never liked me. I was never quite sure what I had done to earn that, whether I was too quiet, too ordinary, too stubbornly present in her brother's life. But her dislike had been a constant in our marriage, steady and cool as a north wind. The Wednesday it happened was the 14th of March, a gray, still morning, the kind Ohio serves up like a meal with no flavor. I had done the dry cleaning, bought the groceries, stopped at Quick Mart. I drove home, put the bags on the counter, and stood at the kitchen table with my phone, checking the numbers the way I always did. The lottery website. The same 6 numbers in the same order. 7, yes. 8, yes. 9, yes. 10, yes. 11, yes. Powerball, 9, yes. I stood very still for a long time. Then I read the number at the top of the screen. $73 million. My hands were shaking when I called the Ohio Lottery Commission's winner services line. A man answered on the 3rd ring. Calm, professional. I gave him the ticket serial number. I heard him typing. There was a pause that lasted perhaps 4 seconds, and then he said, "Ma'am, I need to inform you that a claim has already been filed on this ticket number this morning, approximately 2 hours ago." I think I asked him to repeat himself. I must have, because I remember hearing the sentence again. A claim has already been filed on this ticket number, and still not being able to fit it into any shape that made sense. I was standing in my own kitchen. The grocery bags were still on the counter. I could smell the rotisserie chicken I had bought for dinner. "Filed by whom?" I asked. "I'm not able to share that information at this time, ma'am. The claim is under review. If you believe you are the rightful owner of this ticket, you will need to appear in person at our Columbus Claims office with the original ticket and valid photo identification. I strongly recommend you retain legal counsel." He gave me an address on South High Street and a case reference number. He read it twice. I wrote it on the back of the grocery receipt with a pen I found at the bottom of my purse. I stood there after he hung up for what felt like a very long time. Then I went to find the ticket. I kept it in a small zipper pouch inside my everyday handbag. The brown leather tote that hung on the hook by the back door, the same hook it had occupied for 7 years. I always put the new ticket in there on Wednesday morning and checked the numbers that evening. That was my ritual. My small, private ritual that Richard found so amusing. The zipper pouch was empty. I checked the bag again. Every pocket, every fold. I turned it upside down over the kitchen table. A lip balm, 2 receipts, a Kroger loyalty card, a pen, 40 cents in loose change. No ticket. I thought about the last time I was certain I had it. Wednesday morning. Quick Mart. I had put it in the pouch before I even got back to the car. I was certain of that. And then I had come home, put the groceries down, and the bag had gone on its hook. It was always on that hook. Except that Richard had been home this morning. He was usually at the office by 7:30. But last night he had mentioned a conference call that wasn't until 10. I had not thought anything of it. Why would I? He was my husband. This was his house. He moved through it freely, the way he always had, the way a man moves through a space he has decided belongs to him. I sat down at the kitchen table. When had he seen me come home? Had he watched me? Had he noticed me standing at the table with my phone, reading the numbers, going very still? Or had it been something even simpler? Had he found the ticket first, looked up the numbers himself, understood what he was holding before I had any idea? Richard was a financial manager. He was not a man who hesitated when he identified an asset. I thought about the claim being filed 2 hours ago. The lottery office opened at 8. I had arrived home at approximately 9:15. That meant the claim had been filed before I even walked through the door. He had taken the ticket while I was at Kroger. He had driven to South High Street. He had stood at a window and presented my ticket. The ticket with my numbers, my mother's birthday, the year I graduated high school, as though it belonged to him. Did it? That was the question that crawled through me like something cold. Was he going to argue that it did? We were married. The ticket had been purchased with household money, my portion of the grocery budget, technically, but money from a joint account. Would that be enough for a man like Richard, with a sister like Patricia, to build a legal argument around? I thought about Patricia's thin, careful smile. Yes, it would be. I gave myself 20 minutes to be afraid. I am not ashamed of that. Fear is not weakness. It is information. And the information my fear was giving me was precise and clear. I was alone. I had no income of my own. I had no attorney. I had no copy of the ticket, no photograph, no proof that I had ever held it. What I had was my word. The Quick Mart cashier who had seen me every Wednesday for 10 years, and a grocery receipt with a case reference number written on the back. I washed my face at the kitchen sink. I looked out the window at the backyard. The bird feeder I maintained, the garden Richard had never once commented on in 18 years, the gray Ohio sky, my life in that yard, in those familiar shapes. Then I picked up my phone and called the one person I trusted completely, my sister, Deborah. "I need you to listen to me very carefully," I said when she answered, "and I need you not to say anything until I am done." I told her everything. While I talked, I was already moving, upstairs to the small desk in the bedroom corner where I kept my papers, marriage certificate, tax returns, bank statements, the joint account records going back 4 years. I pulled them out and stacked them on the desk with the steadiness of someone performing a task they have been preparing for without knowing it. "Carol," Deborah said when I finished, "you need a lawyer today, not tomorrow. Today?" "I know," I said. "I have someone, Janet Freed. She handled my colleague's divorce. She's very good." "Call her," I said. "And Deb, don't tell anyone else yet." Not a word. There was a pause. Not even Tom? Not even Tom. After I hung up, I sat at the desk and wrote 3 things on a notepad. 3 things that were going to need to happen in order before Richard and Patricia had time to build their walls higher. My handwriting was very steady. I was surprised by that. Somewhere between the empty zipper pouch and this moment, the fear had not disappeared, but it had changed shape. It had become something I could use. I wrote, 1. Attorney, today. 2. Quick Mart, Wednesday surveillance footage. 3. Bank records, ticket purchase. I looked at the list for a moment. Then I added a 4th line. Do not let him see you know. Janet Freed's office was on the 4th floor of a building on East Broad Street, 15 minutes from the house. I drove there at 11:15 that same Wednesday morning, wearing the coat I'd had on at Quick Mart, the grocery receipt still folded in my pocket. I had not changed out of the clothes from that morning. There was something intentional about that. I wanted to arrive as I was, carrying the exact shape of the day. The waiting room had pale blue walls and magazines arranged in perfect fans on a glass table, and the receptionist smiled the particular smile that people in legal offices train themselves to use, warm, revealing nothing. Janet herself came out to greet me after 4 minutes. She was in her late 50s, small, precise, with reading glasses pushed up into silver hair and the unhurried manner of someone who had heard almost everything. She closed the office door and we sat down. "Tell me everything," she said, And don't worry about what matters and what doesn't. Let me sort that." So I told her. All of it. The ticket, the 10 years of Wednesdays, the empty zipper pouch, the phone call from the lottery office. I told her about Richard and Patricia. I told her about the joint account. I told her about the claim filed at 8 in the morning, 2 hours before I had even realized the ticket was gone. I put the bank statements on her desk, the tax returns, the grocery receipt with the case reference number. Janet listened without interrupting. She made notes in a small black notebook with a mechanical pencil. At the end, she sat back and looked at me over her glasses. "All right," she said. "The first question any tribunal is going to ask is, who purchased this ticket? Not who owned it, who purchased it. If we can show a consistent pattern of purchase under your name, your habits, your account activity, that establishes intent and ownership independent of marital property arguments." "I paid cash every week," I said. $5 from the household grocery money. Did you use a loyalty card, a phone app, anything that would create a digital record tied to you specifically?" I thought about it. The Quick Mart has a camera, has had one for years. I was there this morning at approximately 8:45. I spoke to the cashier. Her name is Marisol. She's been there since at least the last 3 years. She knows me. Janet wrote that down. Surveillance footage is time sensitive. We need to move on that immediately. She picked up her phone and spoke to the receptionist. A request to contact the Quick Mart on Morse Road in Westerville and formally request preservation of footage from that morning. Businesses typically overwrite footage every 72 hours unless there's a legal hold. We have time, but not much. She also told me something I had not known. Under Ohio law, lottery winnings acquired during a marriage are generally considered marital property, regardless of who purchased the ticket, unless one spouse can demonstrate the ticket was purchased with separate funds. My case was complicated, but it was not hopeless, because Richard had not simply argued for a share. He had filed a claim as the sole owner. He had walked into the lottery office and presented himself as the only winner. That, Janet said, is overreach, and overreach leaves marks. I drove back to Westerville with something sitting in my chest that felt different from the fear of the morning. It was not yet hope. It was closer to readiness. I entered the house through the back door. Richard was in his office. I could hear the low murmur of his voice on a call. I moved carefully through the kitchen, putting away the things from the morning that were still on the counter, moving quietly, normally. I was very good at moving normally through that house. I had been doing it for 22 years. That evening, Richard came to the dinner table and talked about a colleague's retirement party and asked if I had noticed the gutters needed cleaning. He looked at me the way he always looked at me. Through me, really, as though I were part of the furniture arrangement, present and unremarkable. He said nothing about the lottery. He said nothing about South High Street. Did he think I didn't know? Or did he think it didn't matter what I knew? I passed him the breadbasket. I asked about Danny's spring semester. I laughed at the right moments. And beneath the table, under the white cloth, my hands were absolutely still. 2 days later, Janet called me. "We have the footage," she said. The Quick Mart camera on Morse Road covered the full counter area. The timestamp on the recording from that Wednesday morning was 8:47 a.m. It showed me, clearly, unmistakably, standing at the counter, handing $5 to Marisol, receiving a ticket, folding it, and placing it in the brown zipper pouch inside my tote bag. But Janet had also requested the footage from the previous 4 Wednesdays. Same time, same counter, same brown pouch. My face, every week for a month on record, and Marisol's signed statement that she had served me every Wednesday for at least 3 years. Always the same purchase, always cash, always $5. "This is your first strong piece of evidence," Janet told me. "It doesn't close the case. Richard will argue marital funds, but it establishes the pattern of individual behavior and possession. It matters." I sat in my car in the parking lot of the grocery store where I had taken that call, and for the first time since Wednesday morning, I let myself breathe fully. I had proof I had held that ticket. I had proof it was mine. Now I needed to prove that Richard had taken it. Janet filed the formal ownership dispute with the Ohio Lottery Commission on a Friday. By Monday morning, Richard knew. I was upstairs when I heard his car pull into the garage. Early, far earlier than usual, the heavy sound of the door going up at 9 in the morning when he was never home before 6. I heard the door from the garage to the kitchen open and then shut with more force than necessary. I heard his footsteps across the kitchen floor. I sat on the edge of the bed in the spare room where I had taken to spending mornings since that Wednesday, and I did not move. He appeared in the doorway. I had known Richard for 25 years. I had watched him angry before. The cold, controlled anger of a man who was certain that his anger was simply superior reasoning that you had failed to grasp. But this was different. This was something rawer. "You hired an attorney," he said. "Good morning, Richard. You filed a dispute with the lottery office against me." He said it the way you say something you cannot quite believe you have to say out loud. "Carol, this is our money." "No," I said. "It isn't." He stepped into the room. "We have been married for 22 years. Every dollar in this house, every account, every asset, legally, that makes us partners. The ticket was purchased with household funds. My attorney—" "Patricia," I said. A pause. "My attorney has reviewed the relevant Ohio statutes. We have a strong case for joint ownership. I am offering you the fair and legal division that the law provides. Half. $36 million, Carol. You could walk away from this tomorrow with $36 million. "You took the ticket out of my bag," I said. "I found the ticket in our shared home. On the same morning, I happened to check the numbers and discovered you took it out of my bag while I was at the grocery store, the store I went to every Wednesday while you were supposed to be on a conference call." I looked at him steadily. "I have the surveillance footage from QuickMart. I have Marisol's statement. I have 4 weeks of video showing me purchasing that ticket every Wednesday. My attorney has filed the dispute. The Ohio Lottery Commission will not release the funds during a pending legal challenge. That is what the law provides." He stared at me. Something moved across his face that I had never seen there in 22 years of marriage. Something close to uncertainty. Then he left the room. I heard him on his phone in the hallway, his voice low and tight, and I knew he was calling Patricia. Patricia arrived that afternoon. She sat across from me in the living room with her briefcase on her knees, and she spoke to me in the tone she used for clients she considered unreasonable, patient, slightly tired, faintly condescending. She explained marital property law. She explained the concept of commingled funds. She explained that a contested lottery claim could take months or even years to resolve in court, that legal costs would erode any award I hoped to receive, that Richard's offer of an even split was, in her professional judgment, far more generous than what a court might order. "You should think very carefully, Carol," she said, "about what you are trying to accomplish here." "I know exactly what I am trying to accomplish," I said. "Do you?" The patience in her voice had sharpened into something else. because what you're accomplishing right now is making this very expensive and very public for everyone involved, including yourself. Is that a threat, Patricia? She smiled, the thin, careful smile. It's a practical observation. Courts are slow. Journalists are fast. Do you really want the details of your marriage and your finances examined in public? Do you want to stand up in a deposition and answer questions about your household budget, your marriage? I thought about those questions for exactly 3 seconds. Yes, I said, I do. She left without another word. That evening, I called Janet and told her about both conversations. She listened, made notes, and then said something that stayed with me. They're frightened. Frightened people make mistakes. Let them. I drove to Deborah's house that Friday and spent the weekend there, sleeping in the guest room, watching movies I had not seen, eating takeout Thai food in Deborah's bright yellow kitchen while her dog snored on the floor. I did not check my phone more than necessary. I did not think about Richard or Patricia or courtrooms or statutes. I sat in the November sun on Deborah's back porch on Saturday afternoon and drank a cup of coffee and looked at the bare trees and thought about absolutely nothing at all. I needed that stillness because I knew what was coming next would require everything I had. The offer came on a Tuesday in the form of a hand-delivered envelope, not a legal document, not something from Patricia's office. A card, in Richard's handwriting, left on the kitchen table sometime during the hours I spent at Deborah's. I came home to find it propped against the fruit bowl like a note you might leave for someone you trusted. Carol. I have spoken with my attorney and I am prepared to revise my position. I am willing to discuss a settlement of 60% in your favor. I think we can resolve this without courts, without costs, and without damaging the lives we have built. Please consider this seriously. Richard, 60%, $43,800,000. More money than I had ever conceived of touching in my entire life. I stood at the kitchen table and read the card twice. Then I set it down carefully, went upstairs, and called Janet. "Hold it for our records," she said when I read it to her. "Don't respond. Not in writing, not verbally, not through a third party. The moment you engage with a settlement offer outside our formal process, you create ambiguity about your position. Right now, your position is clear. You are the sole owner of that ticket. Don't blur that line." "He's scared," I said. "Terrified," Janet said. "The QuickMart footage was filed with the commission this morning. His claim of discovery, that he simply found the ticket in the home, is significantly weakened by video evidence of you placing it in your bag. He knows that." I left the card on the table. 3 days later, it was gone. Richard had taken it back, presumably. He said nothing about it. We existed in the house in a strange parallel state, moving around each other with elaborate courtesy, like two guests who did not know each other well and were trying not to make it worse. I watched him. I had never really watched Richard before, not with clear eyes. I had spent 22 years interpreting his moods, anticipating his preferences, smoothing the atmosphere of rooms he was about to enter. Now I simply looked at him. He was 51 years old. He was tired around the eyes. He went for his runs in the morning and ate the same breakfast he always ate and sat in his office on calls and looked out the window in the evenings with an expression I could not name. Was he sorry? Did he regret it? I honestly was not sure it mattered. What mattered during that careful and suspended period was that I was not alone. Deborah came twice a week. She did not talk about the case unless I wanted to. She brought coffee and sat across from me and talked about her garden and her children and her plans for a trip to Portugal. And the ordinariness of those conversations was like a hand on my shoulder in a dark room. She had told her husband Tom, as I had expected she would. Tom, to his enormous credit, called me once, said, "We're in your corner, Carol," and then never brought it up again. That was exactly what I needed. I also found, unexpectedly, Marisol. I had stopped at the Quick Mart on a Thursday, not on a Wednesday out of habit, just to buy a bottle of water, and Marisol had been behind the counter. She was in her early 30s with dark eyes and the steady manner of someone who had seen many things behind that counter and filed them all away quietly. She recognized me immediately. "How are you doing?" she asked, and in her voice there was something that told me she knew exactly what was happening and was asking a real question. "Honestly?" I said. "Tired, but okay." She nodded slowly. "You come in here every Wednesday for 3 years," she said. "Same ticket, same numbers." "I know those numbers." She paused. "My statement to your lawyer," I told her the truth. I'm glad I could. I looked at her across the counter. "Thank you, Marisol." "Don't thank me," she said. "Just win." I drove home from that exchange with something settled in my chest. It was not triumph. Not yet. It was the quiet, anchoring knowledge that the truth of my 10 years of Wednesdays was not only inside me. It lived in Marisol's memory. It lived in that footage. It had witnesses. Richard and Patricia were watching and waiting. I could feel it. The way you feel a weather system before it arrives. The 60% offer had been their soft approach. I knew them well enough to know that what came next would not be soft. I prepared accordingly. They came together on a Sunday afternoon. That was the first sign that this was coordinated. Richard never introduced Patricia into our personal conversations. It was always, "I've spoken with my attorney," at a careful remove. Seeing them both on the front porch, standing side by side when I opened the door, told me everything I needed to know about what this visit actually was. "We'd like to talk," Richard said. His voice was quiet, carefully arranged into something that resembled sincerity. "Just talk. No lawyers, no letters, no formal anything. Can we come in?" I stepped back from the door. We sat in the living room, the good living room, the one I rarely used, with the cream-colored sofa and the framed photographs on the wall. Photographs of our family, the boys as children, a beach vacation in the Carolinas, a Christmas that looked cheerful from the outside. Patricia sat with her hands folded over her knee, and she was wearing a different face than the one she'd worn the last time. Softer, almost warm. "Carol," she said, "I want to apologize for the way I spoke to you before. I was defensive, and I was speaking as Richard's sister before I was speaking as a rational person. That wasn't fair to you." I said nothing. "The truth is," she continued, "this situation has been handled badly." Richard panicked. He saw the ticket, he saw the number, and he made a decision in the heat of the moment that he deeply regrets. She glanced at Richard, who nodded with the expression of a man who had rehearsed the nod. "He should have come to you first. He knows that." "I panicked," Richard said. "That's true. Carol, I am sorry. I handled that morning very badly." In 22 years of marriage, Richard had apologized to me perhaps a dozen times. Most of those had been perfunctory, the brief acknowledgments of someone who knew that a situation required the word sorry without particularly meaning it. This apology had more texture. It was more detailed. That, in itself, was suspicious. "What is it you want to talk about?" I asked. Patricia leaned forward slightly. "We want to talk about ending this, all of it. The dispute, the legal process, the damage it's doing to this family, to your sons, Carol. Marcus and Danny don't know the details yet, but when this becomes a formal court proceeding, it becomes public. You know that." And there it was. the boys. Marcus was 20 and Danny was 17. I thought about them for a flash. Their faces, the way they still called on Sundays, Danny's easy laugh. Patricia had placed them in the room as deliberately as someone places a piece on a board. "What are you proposing?" I said. "Richard will withdraw the initial claim," Patricia said. "Your attorney and I will work together on a joint ownership agreement. You each take half, after taxes. Clean, fast, private. The boys never have to know their parents went to war over money. Your marriage can, if you choose, continue. Or it can end quietly, with a fair settlement. No court record, no journalists." She said it smoothly. It was a very good performance. Richard sat beside her with his hands on his knees, wearing the face of a man who was prepared to begin again. But I had been watching Patricia for 22 years, and here was what I knew about Patricia. She did not do anything without a reason. She'd never apologized to me before. She was not apologizing now. She was managing me. "The joint ownership agreement," I said. "Walk me through what that means exactly." 50-50 split. Your name and Richard's name on the claim. We filed jointly with the commission and with Richard's original claim still on file. A pause. The commission will reconcile the two filings. "In Richard's favor," I said, "because he filed first." Patricia's hands tightened slightly over her knee. "That's not necessarily Patricia." I said her name the way she had always said mine, with patience and clarity, and the implication that we had moved past the part of the conversation where indirectness was useful. "Your brother filed that claim without my knowledge, using a ticket that my own surveillance footage and your brother's own absence from Quick-Mart on Wednesday morning demonstrate that he took from my possession. If I file jointly now, I blur that timeline. I cloud the possession record. I reduce my claim from sole ownership to contested joint property. And I do all of that while your name is on the paperwork as the coordinating attorney, which means any challenge I raise later looks like bad faith on my part." The living room was very quiet. "You've thought about this carefully," Patricia said. "I've had some time," I said. Richard spoke then. His voice had lost the rehearsed quality. "Carol, we have 22 years. We have 2 sons. Does none of that matter to you?" "It matters enormously to me," I said. "That's why I won't let either of you take something that belongs to me." Patricia stood. The warmth was gone from her face now, replaced by something harder and more honest. "You're making a mistake," she said. "Courts are unpredictable. You could lose." "I could," I said, "but at least it will be honest." They left. I stood at the front window and watched their car back out of the driveway and turn onto the street and disappear. My hands were cold. My heart was moving faster than I wanted it to. This was fear, real, physical fear, and I did not pretend otherwise. But the fear was not telling me to stop. It was telling me that what I was holding on to was real and worth holding. The hearing before the Ohio Lottery Commission's Dispute Resolution Panel was held on a Thursday in late January, 6 weeks after Richard had filed his claim. The room was smaller than I had imagined, a conference room on the 3rd floor of a state office building on South High Street, with fluorescent lights and a long table, and 3 commission officials arranged on one side like a panel of judges. Janet sat on my left. Across the table, Richard sat with Patricia, who had recused herself from acting as his formal attorney of record, a conflict of interest the panel had already noted, and brought in a colleague named Bryce Hadley from her firm, a man in an expensive suit who specialized in asset disputes. I had not slept well, but I was calm. I had been calm for days. The same stillness I'd found on Deborah's back porch in November, but sharper now, with an edge to it. The panel chairwoman, a woman named Dr. Sandra Okafor, opened the proceeding by outlining the facts on the record. A Powerball ticket in the amount of $73 million, serial number on file, purchased on the 14th of March at Quick Mart on Morse Road in Westerville, Ohio. Two competing claims, one filed by Richard Maddox at 8:06 a.m. on the morning of March 14th, claiming the ticket as marital property under his management. One filed in dispute by Carol Maddox, claiming sole and original ownership. Hadley spoke first. His argument was what I had expected. Marital property, commingled household funds, the long-standing legal principle that assets acquired during a marriage belong to both parties. He was polished and confident, and he cited case law with the ease of a man who had done this many times. Then Janet spoke. She presented the Quick Mart footage, not just from that Wednesday, but from the preceding 11 weeks. 11 consecutive Wednesdays. The same woman, the same counter, the same transaction, the same brown zipper pouch. She submitted Marisol's signed and notarized statement. She submitted our joint account records, which showed a consistent weekly withdrawal of $5 coded to a specific grocery store chain. Evidence that the purchase pattern was Carol Maddox's established, repeated individual behavior, not a household financial decision made jointly. Then she presented the cellular location data. This was the piece I had not fully known about until 2 days before the hearing. Janet had subpoenaed Richard's phone records, a standard element of the discovery process once the dispute went formal. Richard's cell phone placed him at the Maddox residence on Morse Road at 8:31 a.m. on the 14th of March. The Lottery Commission office on South High Street was 16 minutes from Westerville by highway. He had arrived there at 8:06. That was impossible. Or rather, it was only possible if Richard had been at the lottery office before returning home, which meant he had the ticket before Carol arrived home from Kroger, which meant he had it before he could have found it anywhere in the house. The timeline his attorney had constructed, Richard sees the ticket on the table, checks the numbers, makes a hasty decision, collapsed completely. The panel chair looked up from the documents. "Mr. Hadley," she said, "how does your client account for this discrepancy?" Hadley requested a brief recess. During the recess, I sat with my hands folded on the table and looked at the water glass in front of me. Janet said nothing. She did not need to. When the session resumed, Richard spoke directly, which surprised everyone in the room, including Hadley. He interrupted his own attorney's revised explanation and said, in a voice that had lost all of its managed steadiness, "She never would have done anything with it. Do you understand that? For 10 years she bought that ticket, and I sat there watching her throw money away every week, and she would have done something foolish with it. She doesn't understand." Richard. Hadley's hand was on his arm. "She's never managed money in her life. Mr. Maddox." Dr. Okafor's voice was quiet and absolutely firm. "Please allow your counsel to speak." Richard stopped. He sat back. He looked across the table at me. In his face, behind the anger and the exhaustion, I saw something I recognized from 22 years ago. The Richard who had not yet decided I was negligible, who had, once, thought something of me. I held his gaze and said nothing. Hadley attempted to reconstruct the argument from the wreckage of Richard's outburst. He was skilled and he tried hard, but the room had already shifted. The panel members were writing notes. Patricia, sitting behind the table in the gallery, had gone very still. Dr. Okafor asked me one question directly. "Mrs. Maddox, in your own words, why do you consider this ticket yours?" I had thought about how to answer that question for weeks. I had considered legal framings and narrative framings and the various ways a person can construct an argument. And then I set all of that aside and answered simply. Because I chose those numbers, I said. I chose my birthday, my mother's birthday, the year I graduated, the year I got married, the year my son was born. I made that choice every week for 10 years. No one else in that family knew those numbers. No one else was there at that counter every Wednesday. The ticket came from my hand and went into my bag and was taken without my knowledge. I paused. It was mine. The room was very quiet when I finished. The Ohio Lottery Commission's written determination arrived by certified mail on a Friday morning, 9 days after the hearing. I was at Deborah's kitchen table when Janet called to tell me it had been released. I drove home, to my house, to the table I had sat at for 22 years, and I opened the envelope standing at the counter because I could not bring myself to sit down. The language was legal and dry and entirely clear. The panel found that the Powerball ticket bearing the serial number in question had been purchased by Carol Ann Maddox as part of an established and individual pattern of purchase spanning a period of not less than 10 years, evidenced by surveillance footage, witness testimony, and consistent transaction records. The panel further found that the timeline presented by the claimant, Richard James Maddox, was inconsistent with cellular location data and physically impossible as described. The panel determined that the ticket constituted Carol Ann Maddox's separate property under Ohio Revised Code, notwithstanding its purchase from household funds on the basis of sole intent, sole possession, and sole behavioral ownership. Richard's claim was denied. I was awarded sole ownership of the winning ticket and all associated prize funds, $73 million to be paid out over a 30-year annuity or received as a lump sum. The panel further referred the matter to the Ohio Attorney General's office for review of potential civil fraud in the initial filing. I put the letter down on the counter. I stood there for a moment. Through the kitchen window, I could see the February yard, brown and bare and waiting, and the bird feeder I had filled that morning, and the gray sky over Ohio, and I thought about all the Wednesdays that had led to this one. Then I called Janet. "Congratulations, Carol," she said, and she meant it. I then called Deborah. She cried. I did not, which surprised us both. The civil attorney Janet recommended for the divorce proceedings, because the divorce was simultaneous, immediate, already filed, was named Paul Reyes, and he was very good. The referral to the Attorney General's office was not purely symbolic. Richard had filed a claim on property he had reason to know was not solely his, under a false timeline he had constructed. The AG's office opened a civil fraud investigation. Hadley's firm quietly withdrew from Richard's representation. Patricia recused herself from every element of the proceedings for obvious reasons. The divorce settlement was handled by the courts and required no negotiation on my part that felt like concession. Richard was entitled to a share of our marital assets accumulated during 22 years of marriage. He received what the law provided: the house, which we agreed to sell and divide equity, his retirement accounts, his share of the joint savings. Substantial, fair, by the law's definition. None of it was the lottery. The Ohio AG's civil fraud investigation concluded 8 months later with a finding against Richard. He was required to pay civil penalties and legal costs totaling just over $200,000. There was no criminal charge. The threshold for criminal fraud in lottery claim filings was higher than his conduct met, his attorney argued successfully, but the civil record was permanent and public. His name was attached to it. Patricia lost 2 clients in the months following the hearing. News travels in a city the size of Columbus. She had not acted as Richard's attorney of record, but she had been present at every meeting, had drafted the initial strategy, and the story, abbreviated and imprecise in the way that public stories always are, spread through their professional circles. She did not lose her license. She kept her office, but the corner of the legal community she occupied became smaller and quieter, and she knew why. What I remember most about the day the letter arrived is not the number. It is not the legal language or the certified mail envelope or the moment I set the paper down on the counter. What I remember is standing in my kitchen in February, looking out at the yard, and understanding, simply and completely, that I had been right to stay at that counter every Wednesday, right to choose those numbers, right to believe, against all of the laughter and the dismissal and the 22 years of being furniture in my own home, that something could change. Not because the lottery was magic. It wasn't. The odds were 1 in 292 million, exactly as Richard had said. But I had shown up. Week after week, I had shown up. I took the lump sum. After federal and state taxes, the figure that arrived in my newly established individual account, no joint signatories, Janet had been clear about that from the beginning, was approximately $37 million. $37 million. I said it to myself a few times in the first weeks, not with excitement exactly, but with the quiet wonder of someone learning a new language. I did not move immediately. I stayed in Westerville through the spring, in an apartment I rented on the east side of town while the house went through the sale process. I wanted to stay close to what I knew while I decided what the new shape of my life was going to be. I took long walks in the mornings. I slept 8 hours a night for the first time in years. I cooked what I wanted to eat, and I watched what I wanted to watch, and I sat in rooms without managing the atmosphere of them for anyone else. Deborah came often. Sometimes we talked about the future. Sometimes we just sat in my new apartment with takeout and the television, and it was enough. I hired a financial advisor, a woman named Susan Choi, recommended by Janet, who specialized in sudden wealth management. We spent 3 months building a plan that was deliberate and unhurried, a portion in conservatively managed funds, a portion in a donor-advised charitable account, a foundation for women in financial transitions that I had begun to think about, not quite fully formed yet, but growing. I bought a house in late summer, not an enormous house, a 1940s colonial in Bexley, 8 blocks from Deborah, with a big backyard and original hardwood floors and a kitchen that got morning light. I painted every room myself. Marcus came to see it in August. He was 21 and cautious and kind, and he stood in the backyard and said, "Mom, this is really good." I believed him. Danny took longer. He was angry in the ways that 17-year-olds are angry when their understanding of their parents shifts underneath them. We had long, honest conversations over several months. He did not fully understand what his father had done, not yet, but he understood that his mother was not what he had been permitted to assume she was. That took time to settle. I gave him time. What I did not give either of them was money, not immediately. I set up college funds and long-term trusts, carefully structured so that the assistance was real and thoughtful without replacing effort. Janet and Susan both advised this, and more importantly, I believed it myself. In the spring of the following year, I launched the Carol Maddox Foundation for Financial Independence, a small nonprofit providing legal aid and financial literacy resources to women in transition. I funded it with $3 million from my own account and began the process of building a board. Janet joined as a pro bono advisor. Marisol, who had left the Quick Mart and was putting herself through community college, came to speak at our first event. She stood at a small podium in a rented room and talked about what she had seen across that counter for 3 years, and a room full of women listened with the attention of people recognizing their own story. I cried that night, for the first time in all of it. And Richard's life had the particular quality of a machine that has lost its source of power. He was not destroyed. He kept his career, his contacts, his running routes. But the civil fraud finding followed him. A promotion he had been positioned for at his firm did not materialize. A colleague who had been a close friend grew distant, and then more distant. He sold his half of the Westerville house and rented an apartment in Dublin, and was, by all accounts, fine, simply smaller. The largeness that wealth can give a certain kind of man, the certainty of it, the permission it extends to dismiss other people, that was gone. Whatever $37 million might have done for that particular variety of confidence, he would never know. Patricia's office on the Scioto River was still there. She still practiced, but the case had attached to her name in professional circles in ways that mattered, and a firm partnership she had been working toward for 4 years quietly passed her by. She appeared at a mutual acquaintances event 6 months after the hearing, and Deborah, who had been there, said she had looked at once both confident and reduced, the way people look when they are performing the version of themselves that used to fit and finding that it no longer quite does. I heard this and felt nothing vengeful, just a clear, clean sort of recognition. Some things simply find their level. I took one more trip to the Quick Mart on Morse Road on a Wednesday in March, a year almost exactly after that particular Wednesday. I bought a bottle of water and stood at Marisol's old counter and looked at the lottery display behind the register. I did not buy a ticket. I did not need to anymore. What I had earned. For 10 years, the people in my life told me I was wasting my time. They were wrong, not because I won, but because showing up week after week for something I believed in is never wasted. The lottery gave me money, but the quiet stubbornness it took to walk into that Quick Mart every Wednesday, that was already mine long before March 14th. What did I learn? Trust the record of your own behavior. Know your own worth before someone tells you otherwise, and when someone takes what belongs to you, document everything. Find your Janet, find your Marisol, and do not flinch. What would you have done in my place? Accepted the 60% or fought? Tell me in the comments. And if this story meant something to you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Thank you for being here.